You ever have one of those records in your collection that you keep going back to time and time again? For whatever reason, that album fits your mood, regardless of what that mood might happen to be. Or maybe it's a particular song you play when you're angry or sad or whatever it is. For me, Bob Mould has released a bunch of those kinds of albums over the last 37 years. Whether you're talking about his work with Husker Du back in the 80s, like Zen Arcade or New Day Rising, or whether it's with the band Sugar back in the 90s, or whether it's any one of his 15 solo records, I go back to Bob Mould's music almost constantly. His latest record, Blue Hearts, is being released this week, and it's one of Bob's angriest, most politically enraged records in years. And believe it or not, that's the Bob Mould that I like best. And with the world being what it is right now, the timing couldn't be better to talk to Bob Mould on Baxy's Musical Podcast.
It's Baxy's Musical Podcast.
So here's a little background. In 1979, guitarist Bob Mould and drummer Grant Hart formed the band Husker Du in Minneapolis with bass player Greg Norton. Initially, Husker Du were a raucously loud and relentless hardcore band, but that would change with each passing album as the songwriting got better and better and the musicianship became tighter and tighter. The band released 6 studio albums over the course of 4 years, ripping out a prolific number of songs on some of the best albums of the decade. But in 1988, after several years of drugs and creative differences and personal disagreements, Husker Du disbanded. In 1989, Bob Mould released his very first solo record called Workbook, and it would have almost nothing in common with his ear-splitting work with Husker Du. Instead, it was a largely acoustic-sounding record by comparison, and while some fans were left slightly confused by the change in direction, the album showed a significantly more tuneful side of Bob Mould, which would be the direction he would follow for the remainder of his career. Whether it be with the 2 albums and the EP he released with the band Sugar, or with the rest of his solo work, like his 1996 Hubcap album, or Silver Age in 2012, or his 2014 follow-up Beauty and Ruin, Bob Mould has matured into one of the finest songwriters of his generation. And it ain't just me saying this. He is generally regarded as just that. And the new album, Blue Hearts, is absolutely no exception. This is my conversation with the great Bob Mould on Baxy's Musical Podcast.
How are you today?
I'm doing good. I was almost going to tell you to put me back on hold. That background music was really, really good.
Oh, okay.
I want to start off by saying, and I mean this in only the nicest way possible, it's really good to have the angry Bob Mould back.
Yeah, that's what I keep hearing from people. I appreciate it.
Well, I mean, it's a shame that it took all of these, horrible calamities to get you there. But I think, as a longtime, fan, this is the Bob Mould that I'm most used to. It's like the Bob Mould is like a comfortable shoe.
There you go.
There
you go.
There you go. I'm still waiting for my CD to come in. So I have heard a couple of the new songs and on Blue Hearts, and I think I know that some of these songs were mixed back in March. Did you have to do anything to make them a little bit more relevant as you were getting closer to releasing this thing, or were they kind of ready to go and angry enough?
No, American Crisis, the first song that people heard, that was written 2.5 years ago. And the album was mastered and delivered by March 1st. So that was when I let go of it.
And that's pre-pandemic, pre-George Floyd, pre a lot of things. I mean, it's remarkable how relevant it sounds, even without all of those things inspiring you in that way. But I mean, it's a remarkable song.
Yeah, thanks. These kind of problems in the world, I think especially with people who fancy themselves to be authoritarians, it's the problems never really change. I guess just this time they're coming at us so fast and from all directions, right?
Right. Last year, you released Sunshine Rock, which everyone was saying is the optimistic Bob Mould, and I love that too. But it's just obviously this is a much different tone. Was there a specific thing that changed for you? I mean, obviously you wrote the new song during that time, but was there a spark that led to this?
Well, I mean, having American Crisis in pocket, it didn't really fit on Sunshine Rock. I just kept writing through 2019 after Sunshine Rock came out, and I think the turning point as far as the narrative of the record happened about a year ago when I was still living in Berlin, Germany. Sort of had this moment where the third year of the Trump administration was feeling awfully similar to the third year of the Reagan administration. And that got me thinking, that got me looking back on who I was when I was 22 years old as opposed to 59 or 58, I guess, at that time. And, I think the capper was coming back, leaving Berlin in late November of last year, coming back to America and just being thoroughly, disillusioned with how polarized the country had become, how, just how ridiculous news as entertainment had become.
Right.
Just really hard to find truth anywhere. And at that point, I just start writing, and this is what we get.
Yeah. Well, when you look at it that way, and you look at like Zen Arcade, for example, and that takes you back to 1984 when you're talking about the Reagan administration, and then have the perspective of living in Europe, particularly in Germany. Were you getting a sense when you were living there of what was actually going on here, or did it take coming back to really see it?
No, I was pretty on top of what was happening, but again, I think it's being in Berlin, which is, a very progressive place in terms, the news is actually quite boring because they treat it as news, not as entertainment. It's a place where I would be out walking during the day and at least once a week would stumble into a large public protest. And, that's what democracy is about, right?
Right.
And I guess to come back here and see a government that's trying to, tear gas people, suppress the citizens, silence any opposition. It's, those are the things that really, I guess, get under my skin. Now, I think for me, the really heavy parallels came more along the lines of, Reagan being sort of a telegenic sort of celebrity president who had a lot of evangelical backing, and then seeing Trump being the same way, and then thinking about what the 80s were like as a young gay man, being told by, evangelicals that, AIDS was God's punishment and that I should die or be rounded up or tattooed or whatever they were talking about. But, I think it's just, sort of bringing my story to light. And, again, writing a song 2.5 years ago, and then now, seeing so many people who are marginalized, whether it's the LGBTQ community or people of color, immigrants, anybody who might be disadvantaged financially, socioeconomically. It's, this is what, when we're made out to be others,
right.
So then we can be demonized. So, those are that's the kind of story I was intending to share. And then, the world took a turn in late May, with Breonna Taylor's
right.
murder and George Floyd's murder. And, then I just had to start listening and learning to Black Lives Matter and paying more attention to politics and, really trying to make my voice heard before I get silenced.
It's interesting how, and you and I are not that far apart. I'm 54, you're 59. It's interesting how how our maturity, our years kind of change the way we view the world. I'm sure it's even as you're talking about, the Reagan administration in the 80s, you still have a different perspective and like how you're going to word these thoughts and these passions today than if you had been doing it 35 years ago.
Well, in speaking with you now, being mindful that there are probably people listening who disagree completely with what I'm saying, I'm trying to be civil about it. But in my work, I have the freedom to speak in any way I choose.
Yeah.
And, I do with you as well, but I prefer to make a civil case as opposed to a belligerent case. I'll save that for my music.
Well, but it's to me, it's not even. I wouldn't even call it belligerent. I would call it honest, and I would call it passionate. To me, belligerent would be there's a sense of irresponsibility to it. But I think what you're addressing actually is criticizing those who are responsible for a lot of what you're talking about. I mean, for example, one of the songs that stood out for me was a song, "Forecast of Rain" about the Catholic Church. That's a very that seems
yeah.
That's a powerful statement that I don't think is belligerent at all. I think it's right on the screws.
Well, I mean, I was raised Catholic, and I think for me, Forecast of Rain is just a general look to religion. Not, I mean, more perhaps evangelicals than Catholics. Although, if the shoe fits, wear it. The idea of hypocrisy, and I mean, when we see an episode like Jerry Falwell Jr. over the past few weeks, having to step aside in disgrace after being found out that he was, having male escorts pleasure his wife while he watched, which in and of itself I have absolutely no problem with. But when you try to condemn me for just simply living my life, surely this hypocrisy must be pointed out.
You've had now, what is this? Is this your 15th solo record in the last 30 years?
Somebody said 14th. I have a box set with 24 CDs coming out next month.
And
all the solo work. I don't even know. It's like that's 24, 14. I'm actually not sure, Mike. I don't keep count.
But and I'll get to the box set in a little bit because I'm really intrigued by it. But by today's standards, that's still a hell of a lot of music. I mean, that's a very prolific career. When you are motivated or inspired to write something, are you writing every day, or is it an easy well to tap into, or is it more of a challenge to get that stuff out?
Generally, I describe my process as being the guy with the big rain bucket, and when it starts to rain, I go outside and catch the rain, and then I figure out later what to do with the water. So, I mean, that's sort of my overview of how I look at my work. Yeah, I tend to write. I keep notes all the time. I tend to sit down and at least try to write music every day. Some days, it's like 16 bars of nothing. Some
Right.
days it's 2.5 really good songs. It's a sort of an unpredictable process. But, as I'm gathering rainwater and as I'm, the sort of the deliberate process of sitting down with the tools to work every day, at some point, a central theme or a central idea, both musical and lyrical, will appear, and that becomes a tent pole. And at that point, my job is to secure the tent corners, the poles, and the fabric, and that's how albums get put together.
Yeah.
It's sort of a mysterious process, but I just roll with it.
Yeah, I remember seeing you guys when you were in Husker Du back in 1987. It was I saw you at the Eagles Club in Milwaukee, and I remember it being cold, impossibly loud. You guys played like 9,000 songs that night, but it was great. And I watched you and I watched Grant, watched you guys interact. And I know it was kind of on the latter part of you guys as a band, but you have two brilliant songwriters in a band. Was there ever like a competitive spirit between you guys that made you want to write better, or was it just came out for both of you?
I think so. I mean, I don't think it was a specific I'm going to one-up you, but I mean, when you've got a number of creative forces, and I guess with Huskers, myself and Grant being the primary songwriters, it was always wanting to make sure the work was of a high quality, and that kind of competition is going to be there naturally. I think it's for the greater good.
Yeah.
But I hope that it didn't never turn counterproductive. But I know when the band broke up, I think both of us were, pretty satisfied to go our separate ways and continue on with our own work. So
well, I think
more music for everybody.
yeah. Well, I mean, I don't think any fan is going to sit there and say, that album just wasn't up to snuff. I mean, there are some people that are going to say that, but I think you guys progressed from, being basically a hardcore band to something much more tuneful and much more important, I think, as you guys went on.
Yeah, I mean, we started out, as three guys in St. Paul who emulated the music that we liked, and then we tried out a bunch of different sounds and styles, and we eventually fell into a groove, sort of a hardcore punk groove. And, as time went on, it got more melodic. I think in terms of that band's history, I would say the Zen Arcade, New Day Rising, Flip Your Wig pocket is probably the strong period of the band. A double album and 2 single albums in, 14 months?
Yeah, I mean, that's an incredibly quick amount of time. And Zen Arcade, to put that much music and weren't most of those songs done in a single take?
Yeah, pretty much everything with Husker Du, the best I can recall, we were always a first take in the studio band. I mean, we would write songs, we would rehearse them. Husker Du was the kind of band that we tried out new material on the road well before we recorded it. I think there was a point during the tail end of Zen Arcade touring that we were already playing songs off Flip Your Wig, which was 2 albums later.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean, we were always writing and we were always playing new stuff for people. So it was, it was a really prolific time.
When Grant died a couple of years ago, I recall something that you had written about him online, and it was very, very moving and very touching. And it, like I said, as a fan of Husker Du, you always wonder, well, what was that relationship, really like? And I know that there was obviously tension towards the end, but you guys did have a chance. I don't know if you would call it a reconciliation, but you did have a chance to speak to him towards the end of his life. What was that relationship like between you and Grant?
We were pretty cordial with each other. I mean, we stayed in touch over the years. Obviously, we were together in a band, so there was always a shared business of sorts to attend to. Nobody really did much on their own with Husker Du stuff. There was always sort of a collective approach to it, whether it was through attorneys who sort of acted as managers,
mm-hmm.
or whether it was me and Grant talking about stuff. I think I think rock and roll is always filled with a lot of great mythology, and I think that people like to amplify the acrimony between us, and we laugh. I remember we would laugh about that even to the end. We just thought it was really funny, and at times it was almost as if we could almost choose to make it worse for if we wanted to get people talking, but we never did that. We just sort of tried to get through things as best we could. And I think that the box set that came out in 2017, the Savage Young Do, is a real fitting conclusion to our to that band's recorded output, and to all the work that Grant put in those last years towards that box set. It's really a nice testament to the band and to the work.
When you guys broke up and you released that first solo record, Workbook, this was 89, I think it would be. That would that would explain the name of the box set. But there were some people who were a little turned off because it didn't sound like Husker Du, and I was not one of those guys. I was one of those guys who thought, well, if you've been in Husker Du, why would you want to continue to be in Husker Du if there's no Husker Du? And I thought that album was, every song stood on its own, and it seemed to be a blueprint of what you would do for the next couple of years. When you started working on that album, were you definitively trying to break free of that Husker Du jacket?
Yeah, it would be foolish to leave a band like Husker Du only to sound like Husker Du later on your own. It's, I really wanted to relearn how to write music, how to present myself. It was nice to have that freedom. Husker Du is a great band, but to have a year and a half working in solitude, away from the music business, just trying to figure out what to do with the instrument, trying to figure out how to be a better, deeper writer. And that was the challenge for me. And of course, just trying to be mindful of, don't duplicate what you just did.
I think the moment it starts with the guitar solo, Sunspots, and then goes into Wishing Well, it's like, all right, Bob's doing something totally different, and I can't deny how great all these songs were. This is when, from my perspective, your songwriting definitively changed, and maybe for the better. Because, and as great as Husker Du was, these are songs I think were beginning to more reflect who you were rather than what the band was all about.
Absolutely. That's an absolutely accurate way to look at it. I mean, that's the luxury of, everything after Husker Du is if it carries my name, or, with Sugar being a band in name, but, primarily my compositions.
Right.
I mean, that's it's all the responsibilities on me, and it's that beauty of trying to add to your own personal language. I mean, the early stuff is really great, and that's and Workbook was a really great surprise to people. It was a surprise to me. I didn't think I would make a record that sounded like that. And as time went on, going to Sugar and forward, it's just carrying all of those threads with me, the early threads, the early solo threads, and you just keep using those styles and trying to build on them, and occasionally taking really crazy turns, up through the electronica era, and now sort of coming back to sort of a protest record. It's like, wow, what a journey.
I do want to ask you about Sugar, because Copper Blue is one of my favorite all-time records. I absolutely love it. It's one of those records. There's a bunch of your records that I keep going back to over and over again, and Copper Blue is one of them. But I know I've heard it described that your reaction to the third record, File Under Easy Listening, was not as positive as Copper Blue, and yet I still think there's great songs on that record. So is that true that you didn't really care for how that third record came out? Because I think you're being too hard on yourself.
Oh, thanks for that. I mean, yeah, Copper Blue and Beaster is a hell of a 1-2 punch, and very, very hard to follow up. I think if I look back on that record, I like that record. I mean, there's songs like Your Favorite Thing that I play at almost every show. I love a handful of the songs still on there. I think where that record may have suffered was just the sheer amount of concentrated touring that went in into the 2 years before that record was recorded. I was exhausted. I didn't have enough time to write. I mean, I had plenty of songs, and it's funny when people hear the collection of rarities in the box set, take all of the B-sides and outtakes from the Fuel sessions and put those together as what should have been side 2. To me, I made a 3-sided record, and the side 2 that I released was maybe not the stronger of the side 2s, if that makes any sense. So I think the songs were there, but maybe I just thought with the second side, I thought, maybe go a little more acoustic, maybe go a little bit more in a country type direction.
Yeah.
I was living in Austin, Texas at the time, and I was digging on those kind of riffs, and just sometimes you just make a decision, and it is what it is.
I'm glad you're looking at File Under Easy Listening a little bit kinder, because we're just starting off our friendship here, and I hate to have to fight you on that one. So
that's right. Okay.
So the box set is really interesting. It's a Distortion 1989 to 2019, 24 CD box set, signed, limited to 1,000 copies if you want to get your signature on it. I don't know, when you go back and you look at that much music and your perspective on things changes. Again, with age, you do look at parts of your life with a different viewpoint. When you look back at all of those things, are there parts of your solo career that you look at more fondly? I mean, you mentioned the albums of Husker Du that you think were the most fertile. Do you feel that way about your solo work too?
Yeah. I mean, in putting the box set together, it goes from Workbook through Sunshine Rock, which was last year's solo album on Merge. It's funny. There's that middle period in my career, I guess the 2000s, where I stepped away from guitar rock and gravitated towards electronica and towards dance music. And that was a really important decade for me, just in my growth as a person, as a gay man, sort of connecting with my community real deeply, doing a lot of DJ work, just looking at music from a different perspective. And, I know how confusing those records may have been for the longtime fans. So I'll be curious to see how people react to them as this box set is presented as like a through line, sort of a continuum of 30 years. And also in the sense that, Modulate, the first electronic record, came out in early 2002, and shortly after that album came out, the Postal Service appeared. And, all of a sudden people started listening to electronic music, or it started making its way into indie rock or alt rock or whatever, stuff, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah. The only thing.
So I'll be curious to see how how those records look to people 20 years later.
I think for me, I love the songs. The auto-tune was hard for me to necessarily get past. But the songs themselves I thought were all good.
Well, thanks. Yeah, and now I think ever since maybe '07, you can't get away from auto-tune.
Right. Well, that is true. But the albums that I go to time and time again, and I mean this totally sincerely, the self-titled album from '96, Beauty and Ruin, Silver Age, for whatever reason, like those three and Copper Blue are the ones that have really kind of stood the test of time. And I keep going. I mean, I got a bunch of CDs and albums in my house. Those are the ones I'll keep going back to time and time again.
Yeah, the '96 album, what I call the Hubcap album, the eponymous album, that was like a really just like a highly crafted lo-fi home recording type record that I loved putting that record together. It was a really dark time for me personally and a real dark record, but it's still got when I was listening back and to the mastering of the 2020 mastering of it, I was just like, wow, I really love the way this record sounds.
Yeah.
And Silver Age, of course, I mean, I was coming off of the my autobiography coming out in 2011. A lot of the work that I was doing with Foo Fighters and the Disney Hall tribute show in November of 2011. I mean, that was a lot of love and a lot, people, sort of paying the respects to the songbook, and it gave me a lot of energy, and really, and getting John Worster and Jason Narduzzi on board full time. That was the first of 5 records that we recorded and toured together, and just everything really fell into place on Silver Age, and sort of been just cranking them out ever since then, and real high quality records.
They really are, and the Hubcap record. I mean, Fort Knox, King Solomon, I think is one of my all-time favorite Bob Mould songs.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, it's my attempt to outdo Hoover Dam. It didn't work, but it was close.
Well, I love it. I just think it's just it's a beautifully written song. I do need to ask you about another part of your career, which I think is really fascinating. I know that you took a break from music for a while to start working for the WCW. I know you're a passionate wrestling fan, and I also know that you grew up in upstate New York, which back in the 70s, most of professional wrestling were regional federations. So I'm pretty sure we probably watched the same wrestlers growing up. Do you remember who some of your favorite wrestlers were as a kid?
Well, I mean, you probably grew up on WWF.
Yeah.
Would you have been a Pedro Bruno superstar Backlund through that era?
Well, yeah. In fact, yes, I was. And a couple of years ago, on my radio show, we interviewed Bob Backlund, and he actually put me in the cross-faced chicken wing. And I got to tell you, that shit hurt like a bastard. He was not holding up.
Yeah.
He put me in it.
Well, you should be happy that he did not make you do the Harvard step test.
Yeah, I think after
listen to one of his babyface promos.
Well, that was the other thing I didn't want to. I think after the chicken wing, I was like, okay, good to see you, Bob. Thanks for coming in today. That was very.
Well, I mean, out of Vince McMahon's territory. I mean, there were some great wrestling. I mean, there was the sort of the original Rat Pack of heels. Was it Ivan Koloff, Ernie Ladd, superstar Billy Graham, who, collectively when they were all in the territory together, they made Vince McMahon's life miserable because they all demanded equal main event pay no matter where they were on the card. Yeah, those are good times in pro wrestling.
Those were, because they used to have wrestling out of Worcester, Massachusetts, which is probably within an hour from where I'm at now, and I remember the days you'd be excited because Haystacks Calhoun was going to be in the ring, and how do you root against a 600-pound man or the Polish Hammer Ivan Putski? I mean those are classic guys.
Oh my gosh, yeah. That territory, man. There was a lot of homesteaders in the Northeast. Chief Jay Strongbow, Husky. Yeah, Haystacks was an attraction. Andre was an attraction.
Absolutely.
Then we got the Valiant Brothers. But I grew up. I actually, as far as wrestling stuff, I mean, I know the history of the territory, but I grew up watching Montreal wrestling, and I was really lucky that the era of the Montreal wrestling wars in the 72, 73, 74, where the Rougeau family had a promotion, the Vachon family had a promotion. It was these a territorial war between two amazing wrestling companies at the same time in Montreal, and
yeah.
A lot of the guys from New York would come up and work the big shows. So I could talk wrestling forever, so we'll stop now.
But you were a script writer at the WCW. Is that right? Is that right?
Technically, I was a creative consultant. I was brought in to help with television, to come up with ideas, to come up with characters, to sort of try to guide a different philosophy. And I was in for about a month and a half, and then a couple other guys got hired away from the WWF at the time. And they came in and they had a completely different philosophy than what I was trying to get people to consider. And, I enjoyed the work. I worked, I ran Gorilla, which was crazy. I was the guy behind the curtain giving everybody the cues and all that nonsense. But, it was a fun gig, crazy business.
Yeah.
1999, still a lot of bad behavior, I guess, in the business. So.
Well, when you're talking about being on the creative end of professional wrestling, that I don't know. I'm going on a limb here, but almost suggests that some of that might have been fake.
Everything you see really happens.
that I'm sure is true. So the name of the new album is Blue Hearts. It really is a very, very powerful record, and I'm anxious to get a chance to listen to the rest of it. I've heard a couple of songs that have been released online, and it's freaking awesome. And the box set, are there two versions of the box set?
Yeah, I'll try to describe this really quickly to people. So the box set is titled Distortion. It covers 30 years from 1989 to 2019. The initial release on October 23rd, there's two versions. There's the 24 CD box set that includes all of the music that is involved with the package. In addition, there will be 4 vinyl box set editions that are staggered over the course of 1 year. So on October 23rd, in addition to the 24 CD box, there will be the first of 4 vinyl boxes. And that period, I believe, is from Hubcap through the end of Sugar. So that'll be Workbook Black Sheets, Copper Blue Beaster, Fuel, the sides, and all the associated outtakes and B-sides and collaborative things that I did with, things like with Throwing Muses, with Vic Chestnut, stuff that I did with John Doe and DJ Bonebreak from X. So, so there's the CD version, and then there's 4 staggered vinyl boxes. And it's a lot to take in. Yeah, and
it's a lot that I'm going to have to spend money on because I can't just buy one.
Well, and the beauty of it too is within the packaging. There's pretty deep liner notes written by Keith Cameron, who's a real real highly esteemed UK music journalist, and all of the album art has been reimagined in an attempt to try to create sort of a travelogue of places that I've lived, things that have influenced me. All of the new artwork is really beautiful, and then as you mentioned, there's limited edition prints in the CD box and in the vinyl boxes that are all signed and beautiful screen prints and stuff. So it's a nice package. I'm very happy with it.
It sounds like it. Bob, it's a real pleasure to talk to you. Like I said, I've been a very big fan, and I have loved your music for years. So to talk to you today is a real thrill. So thank you very much.
Oh, thank you, Mike. Thanks for the support. Everybody have a good evening, okay?
Absolutely. Thanks, Bob. Bob Mould. Not too bad, huh? Tell me what you think of the show. I'd love to hear from you. Email me at facts@rock102.com. And don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Spotify. Most of all, thank you very much for listening to Baxi's Musical Podcast.